But in other news, of people who some people actually called, are you going to fire him? People were asking if they were going to fire Jim Ross for slipping and pitching out last Wednesday night with WWE Dynamite. I mean, it was probably not a fortunate placement. Many people mentioned, well, muscle memory. He's done that, WWE for many, many thousands of times over decades and decades on television. But my DVR cut it off. He cut off the last line because it was what a go home line. It was. I bet you everybody in the truck just flipped their shit up in the air like, oh shit, we almost got by with this one without tanking ourselves too bad. But he slipped and said WWE Dynamite, and people are, is Tony Khan going to fire him? Fuck. If Tony Khan doesn't fire people for committing felonious assault on his television program for real every week and somebody gets carried out constantly, I don't think he's going to fire an announcer for slipping up and getting one of the letters wrong. He got the W.
Oh, come on.
He got the E.
That's no way to defend this.
He just didn't get the A.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
2 W's instead of an A and a W. That's all. That was all the difference. What do you think, Brian?
I think, like you said, the placement of it being the last thing you hear on the show, that's... I mean, I could see Tony Khan sitting there and just hitting himself in the head as he's going off the air. And I'm not saying that as a shot at Tony Khan. I mean, I could just see the frustration. But, I'm not a Jim Ross defender, and I've hit him hard for things in the past, and I've hit him hard for sloppy work, I thought, in the past. But some of these things, it feels like there are people just ready to jump on him for anything. And unfortunately, he has slipped up a few times recently, and it's benign. It's nothing, like, awful. It's not like he's just yelling pussy on TV or anything. But he slips up, and every now and then he gets a name slightly wrong.
Wait a minute. See, that should have been a thing that Shitstain and old Cornrow Ferrara should have come up with. Give Jim Ross Tourette's. They tried every other way to embarrass him and humiliate him. Give him Tourette's, and he can come out, piss out my ass.
But there are people waiting to jump on Jim Ross. And I mean, a couple weeks ago, when Jungle Boy had the match with Omega, at one point they showed Jungle Boy's family in the crowd. He even referenced it. He said, there's his, I think, mother and sister. I may be wrong, though. Don't jump on me, or whatever he said, because he's gotten some things wrong lately. But it's relatively benign. And I think that there are AEW fans who don't like him on the commentating team.
Well, and I also think he made a horrible statement in not anointing Kenny Olivier as the greatest wrestler in the world right off the top of his head a couple weeks ago.
Well, that's the other thing. There's somewhat of an element, let me phrase this very carefully. There's somewhat of an element inside of the company, and I think that based on the knowledge of that, there are some people who are hardcore fans who go with it now, but there's an element inside the company that don't want Jim Ross there, that don't like Jim Ross, that think that Jim Ross not going the full Cornette, but also not going the full Meltzer on the Young Bucks, whoever it may be, that's a problem. Some of the comments in the past, remember when Brandon Cutler fired up at him on Twitter? He doesn't do that if the Bucks don't say go do that.
Well, yeah.
You've seen instances like this where AEW talent itself kind of fires back at Jim Ross, and I think he's in a kind of weird situation now where you have an element that doesn't want him there.
And that element is the people that do the shit that makes him have to do the verbal eye roll that he does every once in a while when it's like, you expect me to talk about what you are doing here when this is falling apart, makes no sense, something's fucking up. And instead of trying to work on not burying your announcers having to call or talk about stupid shit, now let's get rid of the most famous announcer in the history of the world, because he would actually want us to do wrestling that might be logical so that he wouldn't be embarrassed to talk about it. But anyway.
But again, it's to my main point.
Yeah.
It's relatively benign. Leave him alone about this. He said WWE at the end. I don't go for the muscle memory thing just because he has said WWE thousands and maybe even more than that amount of times. He's never said WWE Dynamite. That was wasn't like he said, we'll see you next week on Raw. But again, who gives a shit? In the whole scheme of things, of problems at AEW, Jim Ross is the least of the he's the least of the problems on commentary, let alone the least of the problems in the company. That's my 2 cents. What do you?
Well, as a matter of fact, you said it very well. He's the least of the problems they have on commentary, much less the problems they have other places that go much deeper. They're announcing, except for an excrement, isn't even as markish sounding as he used to be. He's just such a sop, and the gimmick is so ridiculous to look at.
But it's the way he talks. It's the way he says everything on the show. It's just that.
Well, that's because now he's a mark trying to act like an announcer. But if they were serious, as I said 2 years ago, if they were serious about doing a serious television program and having an announce crew that people would actually listen to, they would take the unknown fucking goof who still lives in the glory of when he was a fucking part-time wrestler in front of 400 people in a barn somewhere outside Cucamonga, and it'd say, if you're going to be the announcer, take the mask off because nobody's ever fucking heard of you, and we're going to give you a actual real person's name, whether it's yours or someone else's, but it'll be a first name and a last name, and you're going to be an announcer. And don't ever talk about ever trying to be a wrestler because you weren't really, and nobody gives a shit. That would be addressing the biggest problem on commentary.
That advice right there is something I call Cornette Driver 98.
Yeah. And when that's what he said the Tiger Driver 98. A guy is doing it that is not affiliated in any way with Tigers or Tiger Mask or Tiger King or Tony
drivers.
the Tiger.
Or drivers.
Or drivers, anywhere. He's not even using his left and right turn indicator. Just say, oh my God, he's trying to break his neck. He dropped him on his head. That's good enough. Anyway, that's just a piece of news.